This week on Cruisin', presented by Blue Line Classics. We're back at Stan Hywett Hall and Gardens for more Concours d'Elagance.
The car is basically Fiat.
That doesn't look like any Fiat I've ever seen.
It ended up in a museum in Miami.
This rare Formula Junior race car is next on Cruisin', presented by Blue Line Classics. Tim, 1959 Stanguellini. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
We would have had to stop right there if I blew that name, and I tried to do it with a little Italian accent, but we're talking about a Formula Junior, a racer that actually has a race history. Tell us about that.
Well, this car goes back to 1959 when Formula Junior was the new rage in racing on Saturdays before the Formula One races. They were teaching young Italian drivers how to drive with open-wheel cars. This car was purchased by a fellow from Ohio who was over in Europe in 1959 and bought it in June of 59 and raced it all through Europe until he took it to the Havana runoffs, which were probably 1960 in February of 1960. He brought it to the States then, and that year things started changing to rear engine cars, and the Stanguellinis were pretty much obsoleted, like most Formula cars do get obsoleted in a year or two. This car floated around for a few years in the 60s. I don't really know much of the history then, but it ended up in a museum in Miami in the early 70s and was in that museum until 1994 when I bought it, which is about 20 years ago.
Did it look like this when you bought it?
Pretty much this way. I did some restoration work, not a whole lot, but it's been a race car, and that's the way I want to keep it. And the vintage racing has gotten too hard for me to do at my age, and but I would like to do that. It was a great ride over here from Summit Mall this morning.
Now it has all the racing cues, left offset as far as the driver compartment goes, exhaust out the right-hand side.
Well, that's not so much important. This car was in road races. So it wasn't like an offset for the weight of the car. It was an offset to run the drivetrain down the side so that there was room for the driver. And the car is basically Fiat from 1954, 1955 when they made the Fiat Topolinos. And this is a 1100cc engine in here. And the only thing that could be modified in Formula Junior in the engine was the carburation. So it's got twin Weber carburetors in it, and that was the big modification. That gave it a lot more horsepower and a lot more speed. It was about 140 miles an hour.
Now I noticed you have an electronic fuel pump in there. Was that the case back in the day?
They did have electric fuel pumps then. Yeah.
Now, as far as a road racer like this, the type of tires that are on the vehicle, these are
Dunlop. These are road race. These are almost the same design as the Dunlops were in 1960, 61.
And in all weather conditions, this would go around the track?
Well, they would race maybe in the rain, but weather really wasn't a problem. This car was raced at Monza, at a few racetracks around Italy, and then in Europe, a few races. So it probably raced in 7 or 8 races in Europe.
What does it mean to you sentimentally?
Well, I pit crewed for a guy who raced a Stanguellini in 1961. And that always meant something to me. Years later, I kept thinking about having a car like this someday, and in '94, I bought it from this museum in Miami.
Walk us through the operational procedure of the car. I mean, it's pretty basic.
It is very basic. It's the engine's 1100cc. It's got electric start. They always had electric start in those days. They would go. There's 4-speed transmission. It would go in first gear. You're out of first gear almost immediately, and in the second, third, and by fourth gear, you're up to over 120 miles an hour.
Tim, when you actually crewed for a car like this, what was your job on the crew?
We would just go along with the drivers. In those days, we would, if he needed the tires changed or something like that. It wasn't anything very sophisticated back in the 60s.
But you got a great education out of it.
Oh, yeah, and lots of friends. Lots of friends that I've known for years and years. in racing.
And you also got a love for the Stanguellini.
Oh yes.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome. Thank you.